This court, independent of, but in agreement with, the advisory sentence rendered by the jury, does hereby impose the death penalty upon the defendant Theodore Robert Bundy. It's a tragedy for this court to see such a total waste, I think, of humanity that I've experienced in this court. You're a bright young man. If you'd made a good lawyer, I'd love to have you practice in front of me, but you went another way, partner.
Those controversial comments were made by Dade Circuit Judge Edward Cowart speaking to Ted Bundy, one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. The chilling words, "You're a bright young man," were used to describe Bundy just after he was sentenced to death in 1979 for a series of horrifying murders back in the late 70s. That phrase has now inspired a fiction thriller based upon the survivors of Bundy's attacks. It's entitled Bright Young Women, and it comes out tomorrow. And the author says she chose that title as a pointed rebuttal to the judge's remarks. The book challenges the myth of the charismatic and brilliant criminal, instead emphasizing the resilience and the complexity of the women involved. And best-selling author Jessica Knoll joins us now. Great to have you on.
Great to have you on, Jessica. Thank you so much for being on. This is so fascinating on so many levels. You're inspired by a woman who survived, but also this book is partly autobiographical, isn't it?
No, not this one, but one of my earlier novels, Luckiest Girl Alive, is inspired by
that
events.
one. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, that happened to me, Luckiest Girl Alive. Mm-hmm.
So tell us about what the myths are that you were challenging here beyond the judge's words, but it's also the concept of a serial killer, you know, having this big aura around him and the victims, dead or alive, somewhat forgotten.
Right. So we all know he went on to enjoy a celebrity status. And I saw those remarks made by the judge in a new documentary that came out around 2019. And I was absolutely appalled that those words were spoken in the courtroom that day. And so I got interested and I started researching the case. And I very quickly found that there was no basis to call him a bright young man or to say that he would have had a bright future. He wasn't that smart. He wasn't that charismatic. And he was just kind of okay looking. And those are the words from one of the survivors who I spoke to, that if you really looked at him, he wasn't anything special. And what I did find is that the women he targeted tended to be the special ones. And so I wanted to pull back the lens on what it would have been like to have been a young woman at that time, to see the man who caused so much trauma in your life be remembered that way, when really, you know, the women were the ones that had so much potential.
So in some ways it can correct the record as well. Your book works to sort of counteract harmful gender biases. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that, you know, the judge used the words that he did in the courtroom that day. But beyond that, the way he was spoken about in the press, there were headlines calling him Kennedy-esque and quietly intelligent and virtually really written about the victims, especially the ones where he was ultimately never tried for their deaths or their disappearances. So there is a lot of unresolved grief and trauma around this case. And to me, what was interesting was this idea that he was able to target women because of his looks and his charisma. And I just didn't buy that, because I quickly found many transcripts, interviews with eyewitnesses who reported that, you know, when women were approached by Ted Bundy, they were annoyed with him. They didn't think he was that great. They weren't smitten with him. He often posed as injured, and he asked women for help. And that's how he got women to go off with him, not because they were infatuated with him, but because they felt, you know, that social pressure that I think women still feel today, to say yes, to be accommodating, and, you know, to take care of people. And that's essentially what he was asking them to do.
The new book, Bright Young Women, goes on sale tomorrow. Author Jessica Knoll, thank you very much for being on this morning. We appreciate it. And